you're ready to go.
Got it. Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is my name is Oshea. Sorry, my name is Oshea. Today I will be having a discussion around digitalization and future of work. That is our topic for this afternoon. Just a quick introduction of myself. I'm a master's student at the Durban University of Technology, specializing in quality and policy development. And I've also been selected as one of the South African delegates to the G20 Summit in Italy this year. And I'm in the digitalization and future of work track. And so that's what we've been working with for the past 6 months, with policy recommendations and negotiations with the other G20 countries. But specifically, we are trying to push forward a South African and an African focus as a whole, because South Africa is the only African country in the G20. So we have been trying to do that for the past 6 months. We've been busy with workshops and negotiations. That's actually where I met Farai, the co-founder of the Africa Matters initiative, and she's in the inclusion track. And yeah, so we've been working closely for the past couple of months, trying to push forward a very South African and a very African perspective into the negotiations. So yeah, so that's basically how I ended up here this afternoon to discuss this topic. It's a very big topic and a fairly complex topic, but I don't believe that what needs to be done is that complex really to get South Africa and Africa as a whole back on track. So I'm just going to be breaking down essentially what digitalization is, what the future of work is, and what can be done to ensure that Africa doesn't get left behind with regards to the fourth industrial revolution. So that's a basic discussion for this afternoon. Thereafter, there's a few questions that the Africa Matters Initiative team have brought to me to address and to discuss. I'll be doing that afterwards. And thereafter, if there's anyone with any other questions and comments, please feel free to comment in the chat. I think that you can chat here into the Zoom chat, and this is also being streamed live on Facebook, so you can feel free to put in your questions there, and members of the Africa Matters Initiative will forward them into the chat here. So yeah, so that's basically just a short introduction and me and what we're going to do today. So if we could dive right into the topic. Sorry, 1 second. So the definition that I have on the screen is just a very brief definition of what digitalization is. It's basically the integration of digital information and digital technologies in the hope to produce a society that can promote efficiencies and create new opportunities. So that's just the technical term. But in simple words, what it is, it's digitalization is just using normal data and information that people use on an everyday basis, and then merging it very slowly with different digital technologies that exist, different software programs or computers or phones, in a way that we can fast track different processes and different procedures and create new learning opportunities, new job opportunities, and things along that line. And things along those lines. So that's basically what it is. And then furthermore, digitalization has basically it basically is the preparation step for the fourth industrial revolution. It's the key step that pushes the fourth industrial revolution forward. For those who don't know, or may not be 100% sure of what the fourth industrial revolution is, the fourth industrial revolution is basically now has become the convergence of digitalization, robotics, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, advanced wireless technologies, biological innovations, and so on. It's basically how do we prepare for the future, where a lot of systems and procedures and stuff and jobs will move into the automation sector and to the digitalization sector. So how do we prepare for that? And then we will move on to what is the specific problem with the digitalization in Africa as a whole. So people will excuse me. A lot of the examples that I use is going to be very South African focused, but as I'm sure a lot of people are aware, a lot of the African countries have very similar demographics and backgrounds and very similar problems. So these are problems that overlap quite a lot with other countries that are in Africa. So the main problem with digitalization is that it has, well, digitalization and automation together has created a very large shift in the industrial world, and it has caused, unfortunately, a lot of people to be concerned about the stability of jobs in a lot of different fields. And then in the past year, the coronavirus outbreak really just made the situation a lot more difficult for people who haven't had access. So yeah, so that's basically the essential problem that exists as a whole around digitalization. But with that, it has also presented many opportunities for government and for private organizations to create and adapt to new ways of doing business. So I'm just going to go over a few examples of how I think this can be done. And then after that, we'll move to the question portion. So when people hear of digitalization or the fourth industrial revolution or automation, automatically, and I don't really blame people, their mindsets automatically go to oh, what about our jobs, or are robots going to replace us, and and so on and so forth. And that has been unfortunate. That has been an unfortunate bit of misinformation that has trickled down into through the media, through social media, and really just through, unfortunately, in a lot of the schooling curriculums, this really the importance of this isn't really taught that well. So I don't really blame people for automatically getting a negative perception of the idea. But when we hear of digitalization, what I think of on the positive side is that it's creating also new jobs. It creates new avenues for people to go into that didn't exist before. For example, let's use robotics as an example. It hasn't impacted Africa as much as as it has impacted the West, but you think of that as an entirely new field that essentially didn't really exist at the level that it does now, and that created a whole new avenue of jobs. And I know when when you say things like this, people may think that that's maybe just for people who are fairly educated and fairly have gone to university and have degrees and so on, but that's not necessarily the case, because you have to think along the entire supply chain whenever you think of anything, starting off with well, basically essentially starting off with the land that would be sold. Then you move on to the construction of the buildings, which will require, obviously, a lot of physical labor, a lot of manual labor, and then you go on to the footing of buildings, with electricians or plumbing and so on, and then you move on to the actual supply chains of people who have to supply different firms, robotic firms, truck drivers, salespeople, secretaries, admin staff, cleaners, and what have you. And it's a whole long list. So when you think of a new industry, for example, like that, it's not really specifically that. It's just to say that it's only for people who have like a 4-year degree, because obviously the majority of people are not privileged enough to have that. But it does create a new avenue of new work for different groups of people. So yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that a bit, because I do understand the hesitation that people have when they hear of digitalization, automation, the fourth industrial revolution as a whole. That unfortunately has become a common misconception. And then also, to be fair, government across the board hasn't really done a good job with preparing our countries for the fourth industrial revolution and for digitalization as a whole. So I'm going to just share my screen once more with the opening questions that I had from the Africa Matters Initiative, because a lot of the points that I had prepared, it basically it interlaps over these questions. So I think it probably would be better if we just start with the questions and then move on with the explanations from there. So the first question that we have is, did COVID-19 speed up the pace of digitalization, or did it only make us aware of what was happening already? This on its own is a fairly good question, and it's also a very difficult question to answer. With the arrival of the coronavirus, it's to just for a comparison's sake with digitalization, it's unfortunate. It's like one of the situations where you work in a building and then nobody knows that the fire equipment isn't working until there's fire, and then it becomes very difficult afterwards to play catch up. So unfortunately, that has been the realization with digitalization. There has been a severe lack of infrastructure planning at the government level for a situation like this. So obviously, when we looked overseas in the initial months, Western countries or northern countries, well, almost the same thing, we're able to adapt far more easily, to online learning, to online meetings, and to things along those lines. Whereas we in South Africa and Africa as a whole had a very difficult time adjusting to that. I remember when it first started, a lot of people, most people, like even in the industry where I worked, they had never even used Zoom. They had never even used Zoom yet. They hadn't used Teams yet. I mean, before prior, like if you look back prior to March last year, the only video conferencing thing that people were aware of was essentially Skype, and that was just that if they had friends or families that lived overseas and stuff along those lines. Other than that, it wasn't really that much of a thing. So unfortunately, the lack of preparing and also the lack of legislation dealing with issues that surround digitalization was very, very lacking, and that resulted in the very large inequity that we saw with regards to this. So I would say that for answer to this question, it's actually both, but I would say that it made everyone more aware of what was happening. Yes, the COVID virus did speed up a lot of issues, but those issues were already there. It didn't create the issues. The vacuum was already there. Unfortunately, just expanded into the vacuum. And then, like for example, if I may just give a few issues, in South Africa, for example, there has been this ongoing. I'll just give a quick background just in case anyone isn't fully aware. There has been a lot of this back and forth between the government and private companies with regards to access to broadband spectrum. The broadband spectrum is essentially the infrastructure that is currently built and owned by the government that private companies need to use in order to basically to push out a broadband internet access. There has been major delays over the past couple of years, and even as recently as March this year, the broadband spectrum auction has been pushed to 2022 and 2024, which really doesn't help. Oh, sorry. Which really doesn't help much of the situation when we have unfortunately in our country, it's mainly the fully urbanized areas or the town or the fully running towns that have, or the metro areas rather, that have full access to an internet connection. And then as you spread out into more rural areas, and then when you end up at fully indigenous areas, there's almost literally nothing. And yeah, so basically, so that is a key example of something that could have been done years ago, but there's always this back and forth between who's fighting with who and all that. Not to get too much into political drama, but there's a lot of that which has really been one of the root causes as to why there hasn't been a very large, expansive process of the broadband spectrum in order to give the majority of people access to the internet. Yeah, so that's just an example that I wanted to highlight as to how the virus really just very highlighted a very large issue that was currently there. It was a vacuum that was already created, and then unfortunately it has just been expanded far too much. Then the next question that we have is, what is the impact of digitalization on the rural-urban divide? So this is a very good question, and it really also ties into the first question as well. That there is an extreme difference between what people who live in urban areas have access to and what people who live in rural areas have access to. And now this impact has obviously with the same with a lot of issues that we face. The people who bear the brunt of it are those who are the poorest of the poor, unfortunately. That is the case that we see. So with regards to, my apologies, with regards to the impact that it has. So let's look at the access to the broadband spectrum that's currently available. We see that the majority of people who have access obviously all live in urban areas, and in rural areas it is extremely lacking. And a lot of people have this mindset of what do people who live in rural areas need with with an internet connection or with access to digital technology, and the response is that they need it the most. And they may not need it in the traditional neoliberal ways that that people in the cities use, or people in fully urbanized areas use, but they need it for simple things that they have been able to access online job portals, or being able to advertise their small businesses, or be able to expand their trade network. I think of the example, a simple example of, let's think of a baker who bakes from their home or from their cottage. Just let's think of a single mother who works in this type of situation, and there's hundreds of these cases, and a simple thing as access to being able to an internet access, and being able to use let's just say YouTube, for example, where they'll be able to learn a different baking technique, or a different icing technique, or a different topping technique, or way to have less waste from their products, or way to make a new decoration or something along those lines. So it's really simple things that can really make such an impactful way in a lot of people's lives. And it seems that they do not have access, not because they don't want to have access to it, but because they have, unfortunately, they've just been left to the side. And these are people who really need it the most. They don't. The majority of people, they don't need it, for Instagram or for Twitter or Facebook or whatever. They need it, to try to improve their lives, try to even a simple thing as being able to use, let's say, Gumtree, for example, or OLX or something, where people can find cheaper materials to weave their baskets, or to make material bags, or to create wire sculptures, or to get gemstones or something, things that a lot of small businesses have, but they don't know how to go about doing this, and how to be able to access these types of technologies, and how they can use digitalization to improve their working opportunities, or their income opportunities rather. And yeah, and then if we can go on to the next question, in your opinion, will complete digitalization bridge inequality or worsen it? So I don't think that complete digitalization will ever happen as a whole, on the continent as a whole. I think that's eventually, slowly, it will increase across the board, and it will slowly trickle down. But I don't think that complete digitalization will ever happen. And if I think that if it were to happen, it would worsen inequality. Because if it was the case that where everyone was starting on an even footing, and everyone has some form of access to data, or some sort of access to digital technologies, while they're in school and things along those lines. Then if you are starting off at that point, then you could say that it could help bridge inequality. But when it has been left for so long and there's millions of people that have been left out, complete digitalization will unfortunately worsen it, because a lot of these it's going to take a long time. It's going to take years and years, probably at least a decade, to try to catch up on a lot of the issues that we have, in order to help people and assist people to bridge the gap between digitalization and where they are presently. So I don't think that complete digitalization will ever happen. But if it were to happen, I think that would just worsen the divide. And then, sorry, 1 second. I just want to share the next set of questions. Okay, so our next set of questions, if anyone thinks I'm rushing to these questions, a lot of them overlap with some of the other points that I'm going to be discussing. Because with digitalization in Africa, a lot of the issues, these are not standalone issues or isolated issues. A lot of them interlap and integrate with each other. So our next question is, what measures should government implement to orientate marginalized communities into the digital age? This is a very good question, and it draws on back from the two previous questions. So the first thing that I would suggest is that currently there are auction bids for certain wavelengths of certain frequencies of the broadband spectrum, and then there's a lot of others that have been delayed by court cases and political infighting and things along those nature. But the first thing that I would suggest that needs to happen immediately is that the digital infrastructure and the broadband spectrum that government controls, they need to auction it off and sell it to the private sector, so that they can begin expanding access to digital technologies. By not releasing the broadband, what is left of the broadband spectrum to private organizations to spread out, all it's doing is you are just stopping people from getting it completely. Because presently, if at the state that it is, whatever Cell C, Telkom, MTN, and Rain and things have access to, that's all they have access to, and then those are the areas that that they are supplying or they're getting to. But once they have access, once different companies and organizations have access to the rest of the broadband spectrum, they will then be able to expand out, because the broadband spectrum is built across the country. And by these delays with court cases and things along those nature, all it's doing is now that these private organizations now have to build their own infrastructure when infrastructure already exists. And them building this infrastructure is just going to increase costs of data. It's going to increase costs of Wi-Fi connection, or those who are fortunate 5G connection. So I think that is the first and most important thing to do, is that auction needs to take place and it needs to be sold off into the private sector. And the amusing thing about this about this issue is that they are not asking it for free, or neither is government giving it for free. It's just a matter of letting go of what you have, because nobody is using it. Like, for example, the 5G spectrum uses the same spectrum that radios use presently, and yet when you think of 5G, it's literally only in the few metro areas, in Cape Town, Durban, Johannesburg, and Tshwane, that have access to 5G connection. Yet it uses the same spectrum as radio does. So there's no need for these delays. It serves absolutely no purpose. It's just, again, it's just punishing the poorest of the poor who need urgent access to this. And then the second point that I would like to bring up is, of course, the pricing structures of data. In South Africa and in quite a few African countries, the cost of data is extremely high. And then this will now serve as a deterrent to digitalization, and it's pushing people away and pushing people back from being able to access, digital technologies. So that's the next thing that needs to urgently be addressed. I think this can be happening in two ways. The first part I've mentioned with allowing more access of the broadband spectrum to the private sector. I mean, there have been many companies who have said that once this is done, they will no longer need to build their own infrastructure, so they would not have to invest in that, and then uh, data fees and stuff will not have to be as expensive as it currently is. And then the second thing is that, for example, the example in South Africa, the Electronic Communications Act, I would suggest that it needs to be amended to include competition rules between the private sector to ensure that there's an even playing field, because data is no longer a want. It's a need that people have in order to do many things. In order to do many things in life. A simple thing as being able to being able to make your own CV. It may seem like not a big thing, and it may not seem like a big issue to a lot of people, but someone who's never had a computer before, has never been able to use a computer before, a simple thing like being able to make their own CV when they're going around to different businesses and organizations trying to get a job, them being able to give that automatically, not not rightly though. When people see that, they're gonna pick up those CVs first. So yeah, so those are the two major things that I think needs to be implemented in order to orientate marginalized communities into the digital era. And then another point is that, for example, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development has had a finding in recent years that digital poverty needs to be alleviated and needs to be eradicated, and that's also something that we, as a South African delegation to the G20, are trying to push forward. That these are major issues that need to be pushed forward in order for the poorest communities to begin to move forward. Then the next question is, what should entrepreneurs who are starting off as well as those who are pivoting keep in mind? So there are quite a few things that they need to, that people should keep in mind when it comes to professional development. The first thing is that I think, again, this sort of bounces off what I was saying with regards to with pricing structures being a deterrent to digitalization, and putting people off. To register a business, for example, in this country, it's a very costly and it's a very lengthy process. So I think that when people are planning what businesses they want to have and whether they want it to be I'm speaking to people who want to have formally registered businesses. I think they need to ahead of time realize that it is a costly endeavor to go across, because for example, for people who don't know, first you have to register for tax, then you have to register at the Department of Labor, then you have to go to, depending on what type of business you want to get, then you have to go to the health department, the Department of Trade and Industry, or or Department of Tourism, or whoever it belongs to, or whether it's the Department of Cocktail, for example. That's the Department of Corporate Governance and Traditional Affairs. So it's a very costly and it's a very long process to go to follow. So I would advise people to, when you are planning what you want to do, to keep those timeframes in mind, because a lot of these things take a really long time to process and to push forward. Which sort of brings me onto my next question. I mean, onto one of my next points is that I think that sorry. I think that government needs to urgently begin to create a single online portal in which small business owners are able to, if they choose, if they choose to be able to at one shot be able to register their businesses with the relevant departments, with the tax department, or the finance department, and whoever it is, so that people do not need to take time, or time out of their jobs or time out of their lives. Because to go to each of this department, obviously you have to take the day off, then you have to go and stand outside from 4 in the morning or 5 in the morning. And these are things that put people off from wanting to join the formal market, or wanting to improve their lives. So that is also another suggestion that I think that government needs to follow. They need to push forward and create, online digital portals so people are able to do that. And then, once they do that, then obviously I know uh, in recent times, certain portions of the Home Affairs has gone online, and then you can go, to the certain banks to take the picture and your fingerprints and stuff. But something like that needs to be, broadly available to everyone. Not necessarily, not now presently just those who have a computer. Those who have a phone be able to, just go onto the portal, register everything that you need to do, take your picture, send it off, and then move, and then so that people can move on with their lives, and not because not everyone can afford to take that day off work or to take that second day off work, because then sometimes the system is offline, and then there's this, that, and the other. So that's also one of the key things that I think governments need to work towards: a digital consolidation of different online portals or different processes and procedures, so that people want to be involved. They want to formalize their work, or they want to apply for tax, or they want to get, or they want to be registered for whatever reason, or they want to get their workers registered for UIF and stuff. So these things are very important in order to getting people to want to join the formal economy, or to want to get people involved. And then the last question is, should everything go online, or is there still room for manual work and production? No, I don't think that everything should go online. I think there will always be room for manual work and production, especially in Africa, since there has been this very large gap that now people that everyone's trying to catch up on with regards to digitalization and preparing for the fourth industrial revolution. So, but either way, I do think that there's a lot of hope, and then there's a lot of interest, and there'll always be the need for manual work and production, especially in small businesses. I don't think it would be feasible, for all small businesses to shift into automated, or into automated or robotic firm. But them being able to access digital technologies and being able to to work online and stuff, that is a different case as to whether admin workers, or salespeople, or buyers, and things along those lines. But I don't think that there is room for all manual physical work to go online. I don't think that that would be a feasible route for for our country, and for our continent, for that matter. So that's that's what I think along the lines of, should everything go online, or should there still be room for manual work and for manual labor? So those are some of the questions that have been posed by the Africa Matters Initiative. If there's any other questions, please feel free to ask, or feel free to comment. But there are a few other points that I would like to discuss, or address rather, while we are here. I think that digital skills development is also a very important thing. I think maybe this I should have mentioned with regards to how to orientate marginalized communities into the digital era. Is digital skills development from the school level is very important, and I think that's one of the main things that has unfortunately been left out. I do think that going forward, that there needs to be compulsory basic computer skills added from the grade 1 level, so that from an early age, kids are able to slowly learn, and their brains are slowly developing into with not into rather with digital technologies. Even having like a class once a week, people are able to learn how to use Word, or how to use Excel, how to use PowerPoint and stuff over the years, and it will serve them as such a good thing once they reach high school, and then once they reach grade 10. Because for example, not everyone is able to finish school, but if those who need to leave school too early, to support their families, or if they have any issues that come up, where they're forced, that they need to get a job and stuff, they're able to go, to the employers and say, hey, I'm able to use this, I'm able to use this type of software, I'm able to do, these type of things. So I think that compulsory basic computer skills, I don't think that, adding in robotics and artificial intelligence and stuff from such an early age is feasible, especially because at the cost of, equipment and software of that nature. And then teachers, obviously, I will have to be retrained and have to go, and these processes take years and years. But I think a very feasible option is compulsory basic computer skills from the grade 1 level, at least once a week, so that people can slowly learn how to develop. And then from the grade 10 level, I do think that I do know that the Department of Education the previous year, well, actually at the beginning of last year, they began introducing pilot programs for coding and for robotics in certain schools. So that's obviously something that we'd welcome, and we'd like to see that move across the board. Yeah, across the board into different schools and from all grades. So that is a very important thing, though, that I think that will help from a young age. People have some form of access. They have some way of being able to move forward with these types of things. And then another issue that somewhat relates to this, as this will start off, with people at an early age, there is a barrier that's between, I would say, high school and then those, not necessarily those who go to university or those who enter the workforce directly. Sometimes they are not really aware fully the importance of being able to choose if if the schools have are fortunate enough or privileged enough rather to have to offer different computer programs or different robotics programs and stuff. A lot of people don't realize until after they've left school and they've entered the workforce or they've entered the university into the university world. They don't realize the extent to which they needed to have done this before, or they need to have chosen these things as subjects. So I think when people enter high school at the grade 8 and grade 9 level, the Department of Education needs to get involved properly and give proper seminars and training sessions on the importance of, if people choose to go in this direction, of being able to to choose IT, or whether CAT, or for those who don't, that's computer applications technology. IT is information technology. Those are the two computer related subjects that we have in South Africa from the grade 10 phase, so that people know from an early age, before they actually choose the subjects, that they should keep these things in the back of their minds, because in this digital era, it's that's like one of the first things that employers look for, or that universities look for as well. And then the last point that I have is would a lot of the things that I've mentioned are the positives that digitalization can bring forward, but with that there also are some negatives that have arisen with regards to digitalization. And one of the one of the unfortunate negative that has arisen with digitalization has been the use of digital technologies such as biometrics and facial recognition to racially, religiously, and gender profile people. That has been one of the unfortunate downsides, and one of a very significant downside as well. I know in Africa as a whole, we haven't seen the full branch of that, but those who follow what happens overseas would see that this has emerged as a major problem in the West, and we would like that issue not to emerge as an issue here. So, for example, some of the recommendations that I would say around that is that the Department of Home, the Department of Home Affairs, and then the Department of surveillance agencies. For here we have the SSA, to undergo anti-discrimination training in order to educate people on stereotypes and reinforce good governance, so that when people are using digital technologies, like biometrics and facial recognition, they are not seeing the picture of this person and be like, oh, this person's going to be like that, or seeing the names or of people from biometrics and making judgments based on stereotypes. So I think that these agencies and these departments need to undergo training in order to mitigate that response. And then furthermore, I think that the Discrimination Act in our country and in countries across the board, in Africa and across the world, needs to include digital discrimination as a portion, as an important part as an important part in order to help aid in stopping racial, religious, and gender profiling with digital technologies. Because unfortunately, you see with some court cases overseas where it's the case that people say that what they're doing is not technically illegal, so they can still do it. So I think that discrimination acts or equality acts that exist around the world need to include digital discrimination as something that we need to be against. So yeah, so that's basically the questions that I have for today. I'm sure I still have a few minutes left. If anyone has any other questions to ask, that is essentially basically a rough, well, not a rough, that's an overview of digitalization and the future of work, and how Africa can be prepared for it. Even though we have fallen somewhat behind, it's not the end of the road. There's still a lot of hope, and there's still a lot of progress that can be made. And I think, and with some of the suggestions that I have put forward, I think that if we can work towards that, it will help bridge the gap between inequality and digitalization. So I know a lot of people have a very sad feeling about this, or feel that it's too late. It's not too late. It's never too late. There are slow improvements, and there's a reason for a lot of hope. You just look at the youth in our country. They are ever so ready, to learn new things, to grow, and are always ready to to push forward and to do new things. So I think it's just that the government needs to present the opportunity in terms of some of the responses or the recommendations that I suggest, for more people to become involved and move forward. I know not directly related to if you live in South Africa, the news last week where that President Ramaphosa announced that private companies will now be able to generate up to 100 MW of electricity, of energy rather, is one of the most, well, in my opinion, arguably the most significant positive policy development that we've seen here in, I would say, at least since maybe 2009, 2010. And this is something that when I heard it last year, I was so taken aback. I honestly didn't think that it was gonna. It's currently at 1 megawatt, so that it's gonna move maybe to 10, but to move to 100, that's such a significant improvement. And then with the companies with their excess energy and electricity, they're able to transmit that back into the grid, so that people can use that, and hopefully, as time goes on, bring down electricity costs, bring down energy costs. So there is a lot of reason for hope, and there's a lot of reason for hope for change. So that is that is the message that I would leave everyone with, that there's a lot of hope out there, and there's still a lot to look forward to. So I'd like to thank everyone for their time who joined in to listen. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss this. If you have any other further questions or comments, I'll ask the Africa Matters team to post my email address in the underneath the video, and you can please feel free to contact me at any time to ask about any questions, or if you have any suggestions or any recommendations that you would like us to present at the Youth Summit for the G20, please feel free to do that. We are always open towards that. So I'd like to thank everyone for their time, and I'd like to thank the Africa Matters Initiative for this opportunity to discuss digitalization and the future of work. Good night. Thank you.